So I think what we have here is all the makings of what I said is potentially a multi-billion-dollar product that we're really at the final stage at this point.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us back here at aTyr Pharma's channel. We're, of course, sitting here once again with Dr. Sanjay Shukla, President, CEO, and Director of the company. Now, Doctor, you and I have talked about your background. We did a pretty good job of giving everybody an overview of the company as a whole, but today we want to shine the microscope on your guys' lead candidate, Efzofitimod, and kind of talk about it in a spectrum here. So how are you doing, and are you ready to get into it?
Great. Let's dive in.
Perfect. So kick off by telling me about where did this come from? Give us the origin story of this one.
So as we discussed in the last time we spoke, the company was founded around looking at these protein fragments that are in all of our bodies that seem to play a role in an underground role in controlling local immune damage. Sometimes that involves calling more immune cells to that organ or tissue. Sometimes it can involve resetting the immune balance. This is a particular fragment of one of these therapeutics, potential therapeutics we have in our IP that we saw some early signs that it seemed to really modulate inflammatory cells of the lung. So the early signals going back 5 years ago showed that in the petri dish, this particular fragment of histidyl tRNA synthetase, and we called it back then, this fragment 1923, seemed to really downregulate immune cells that are activated during an aberrant inflammatory response in your lungs. And that led us to lung disease, the types of lung disease that are known as interstitial lung disease. These are chronic inflammatory types of lung disease. Many of you may know things such as asthma. That's a more of an acute type of disease, causes sort of bouts of obviously bronchoconstriction. But interstitial lung disease is a group of diseases where these patients are chronically inflamed. And there can be a number of reasons why this happens, but we thought the therapy could be useful in tamping down the immune system in patients who have interstitial lung disease. So Efzofitimod, which is what 1923 is now called, really advanced from those early days of looking at what it did in immune cells. And then we started to translate those findings by looking at animal studies where animals were basically a chronic inflammatory environment was created in their lungs by using different kinds of techniques. Sometimes there's direct injury, animal models, sometimes there's indirect. But we ran about a half a dozen of these types of experiments, testing different types of agents that cause a lot of inflammation in the animal's lungs, mostly mice and rats. And Efzofitimod in the animals also seemed to reverse a lot of this inflammation and even prevent some of that fibrosis. So this is how the therapy advanced from the dish to animals. And since then, we, of course, have produced some rather outstanding effects in a clinical trial. So in essence, the drug is meant to downregulate aberrant immune response in patients who suffer from these forms of fibrotic lung disease. There's a number of types that we've mentioned before, but our target was really this disease called sarcoidosis, which is a rare disease that primarily causes a lot of clumps of immune cells to sort of germinate and create a granuloma in your lungs. Many of you listening to this may know most of the 9/11 workers know of them. After 9/11, the towers went down. A lot of that debris, the folks that went in there that cleaned up that debris, they came down with very, very severe fibrotic lung disease. That was sarcoidosis. They came down with this form of chronic inflammatory lung disease that progressed to really a fibrotic form. So this is a serious disease. Once inflammation takes hold, you're at risk of becoming fibrotic, and then from there, you can develop really bad complications, and you see upwards to 1 in 5 patients dying because they need a lung transplant to survive.
Interesting. So this pulmonary sarcoidosis, as you said, is super serious. And actually looking back on it in the history of the fire service, it's one of the reasons why they eventually started wearing respirators and such, not really because of the heat, but because the amount of damage done to people from smoke inhalation over time, breathing in all those chemicals. So I guess from there, this is your guys the primary indication you guys are working on, but it's not the end all be all, right? It sounds like there's a lot of potential across multiple ailments you guys potentially help treat with this, correct?
Correct. We've tested, as I said, what I would consider 3 to 4 different disease phenotypes. These are environments not exactly translatable to humans, but what you try to do in the animals replicate a disease. So we ran some experimental models that seemed to replicate the formulation of a granuloma in an animal. We were able to reverse and prevent some of that. In other instances, we tried other agents like bleomycin, which is a known agent, causes a lot of fibrosis. Efzofitimod reversed a lot of that fibrosis in those animals. So this has connections to IPF, and some of your viewers may know pulmonary fibrosis from a number of biotechs approaching that indication. There are patients who have scleroderma or RA, autoimmune disease. Sometimes these patients, their systemic disease can actually attack their lungs. What happens there is they form a form of interstitial lung disease that our drug, also in animal models, seems to do a nice job in tamping down. We ran a experimental model where we effectively created a sclerodermatous mouse by mismatching bone marrow on the ears of different mice. It causes the skin of the ears to become very fibrotic. A lot of creates like a scaly rash, similar to what a scleroderma patient may have. It also causes a lot of lung inflammation in those mice. Efzofitimod, when we treated those mice, it resolved not only the lung inflammation, but also started to clear up some of the skin manifestations. Wow. So there's a lot of opportunity here with Efzofitimod. We have established proof of concept in pulmonary sarcoidosis, but when you think about all of those conditions, Efzofitimod has the potential to be a transformative therapy, a first-in-class, first therapy for these patients. And we're looking, based on experts' opinion and some of the market research we've done, this could potentially be a multi-billion-dollar treatment, because there's such a dire need for new treatments. There really are treatments in these areas, and our therapy thus far has the most promising results as we enter phase 3 now.
Yeah. So things are really promising, it sounds like. So then walk me through how it gets there. So as you said, as you're getting ready to enter phase 3 with pulmonary sarcoidosis, how does that open the door for you guys from there? And what's the time frame you think?
So this is a trial that we just kicked off. We're initiating this quarter in pulmonary sarcoidosis. We've negotiated and had good interactions with the FDA and worldwide regulators. And now we have line of sight on how to really get this drug approved through what we think is a single major study here that we are kicking off. It will enroll about 264 patients. It's a big number in rare disease, but this will demonstrate, hopefully, not only the drug is safe, which we've already seen thus far, but it's also efficacious. By doing so, we think we can be the first therapy ever approved for pulmonary sarcoidosis. And then we can start to move into some of those adjacent similar diseases like scleroderma. But our goal really here is to get that trial enrolled and read out. We are still talking about several years until we'll actually have those readouts. But again, this has been a long journey where we've already put 6 years in. The drug had outstanding effects in animals. We saw some safe signals in healthy volunteers. And now, from our last trial, we saw some rather outstanding benefit where the drug improved lungs in pulmonary sarcoidosis patients. There was improvement in pulmonary function testing, but it also improved their symptoms. Their cough, their shortness of breath got better. But the biggest thing is we did all of this while reducing their steroids. And these patients get steroids to control their cough and shortness of breath. The problem with steroids is you and I can take them for maybe a week or two for, muscular ailment or something like that. That's one thing. But if you're on steroids for sometimes months or years or even decades, sometimes it could be a decade while these patients decline, that creates a lot of toxicity. Steroids cause weight gain, a lot of cardiovascular, metabolic effects. So our therapy is not only improving the quality of life for these patients, but we're doing so while reducing this toxic burden of steroids. This is why worldwide pulmonologists really view Efzofitimod as a potentially transformative therapy. And it's kind of what we do here at aTyr. We really are trying to make major impacts in clinical medicine because we think our biology can be harnessed in areas where right now there's been decades of failure or no drugs have ever been approved.
Yeah.
So this is a trial, Michael, that we just kicked off, and we expect to have data, but it's going to take a couple of years until we have data there. But we think that this is really the final step before approval.
Yeah. Naturally, good things usually take a long time to get through the door, and bad things usually happen all at once. So fair enough. And it sounds like you guys are well on this journey already, which is awesome. And just last but not least, so let's say once this goes through for the pulmonary sarcoidosis, from there, does that make getting it approved for other indications easier, or does that make the process a little bit faster or anything? Walk us through that side of it.
It can, in my experience, having worked in larger pharmaceutical companies, getting that first indication starts to basically then create a pathway to moving into adjacent indications. We can do this in parallel. If we were a larger company, we'd probably run 3 or 5 parallel studies right now. I came from Novartis. We could run 7 phase 2 trials and multiple phase 3 trials. But as a small company, we have to prioritize where we think it's going to work best, and then we'll start to move into those other areas. So what I'll say is, once you actually have that evidence in one indication, the community of doctors and experts, they really start to become excited. But they already have with our therapy, because as I mentioned, no therapy has seen thus far. I was talking to an expert the other day who said, yours is the only therapy that in the last, say, 20 years showed lung function improvement in patients, symptom improvement, all at the same time by reducing steroids. So we've checked all 3 of those boxes, and experts already are clamoring to use this therapy in other indications, or at least test it in other indications. But as a small company, we're focused on this one to get really the drug approved, and then we'll start talking about building its ability to impact a larger market of medical conditions.
Perfect, Sanjay. Well, like I said, this sounds like a really exciting journey you guys are on. Obviously, this is something people have wanted for a long time, can really help alleviate a lot of real people suffering with this here. So wish you guys the best on it. Is there anything else you want to add? I feel like you did a great job of really breaking Efzofitimod down for your common person here to understand it. And of course, if you guys have questions, don't be afraid to send them over. But Sanjay, before we go today, is there anything else you want to add?
I'll just add that this is a therapy that is administered once a month through a 1-hour IV infusion. If you think about getting a drug approved, we can also start to look for even easier ways to administer the therapy. Maybe it's an injection every 3 months. That's something investors ask me. But we're replacing taking pills every day, which also is something can be burdensome for patients to remember to do that. So we think we have a therapy here that's safer, potentially transformative with its efficacy, and as far as how we administer it, we're going to try to also reduce the burden and make it easier for patients to actually get the therapy. So I think what we have here is all the makings of what I said is potentially a multi-billion-dollar product that we're really at the final stage at this point.
Very well said, Sanjay. Well, again, thank you for walking us through it. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, don't be afraid to leave your questions below, and stay tuned for more content coming soon. Sanjay, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.